All right, joining me now is Jim Townsend, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO Policy with the Pentagon and now with the New American Security. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here.
When you hear about these new sanctions on Russian oil, do you think that they will be effective in bringing Putin back to the negotiating table for peace?
Well, I think they will be effective. I think they're going to really squelch off a lot of the gasoline that the Russian people have been needing just to put in their cars. This is going to be a lot of domestic pressure on Putin. I think this is also going to reduce the money for his war machine. He gets a lot of funding from his sale of oil abroad. And now both China and particularly India have cut back on their imports of Russian oil. So it's having an impact. Will this drive him to the table? Well, I don't know, but I think this is the best thing we've got going right now, except for providing the Tomahawk missiles. That is still on the table. The president has not said that he's going to move forward on that yet. But let's see what happens with these sanctions and see if the domestic pressure might drive him to the table.
Are the Tomahawks back on the table? Is that what you've been hearing in your circles? Because they seemingly were on the table. Zelensky planned this meeting to come to the White House, then Trump picks up the phone call and speaks to Putin on the phone for 2.5 hours, and all of a sudden, no more Tomahawks. So what are you hearing?
Well, I think what we're starting to see around here is that they're not off the table. In other words, the president has said, look, I don't want to talk about Tomahawks. That's not where we are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he didn't say we will never provide Tomahawks to the Russians. He's leaving it there in the background, as he should. I mean, this is leverage. Obviously, the Russians, Putin particularly, was very concerned about those Tomahawks, which is why he called Trump to begin with. So you know that this is it's something that Putin wants to avoid. So it'd be best to leave them on the table. If he doesn't want to talk about them, fine, but they're there just in case he wants to really up the pressure after doing the sanctions. Then he's got the Tomahawks.
Jim, frame for me how punishing you think these sanctions might actually be, because as we mentioned earlier, the Russians have been fairly creative, if you will, at evading these sanctions before, using these fleet of mystery tankers that evade detection or trading with other nations like India and China. So do you actually think it'll provide the impact that the U.S. is intending?
Well, so far, we're seeing a reaction by India particularly, and I've heard China as well. But I do know with India, the importation of Russian oil has been slashed, quote unquote. So we know that they are having an impact in terms of imports of oil by India. You know, the other sanctions that they've evaded, I mean, you're absolutely right. They have worked around other kinds of sanctions. These are going to be harder and harder to work around. It's been a noose that has tightened and tightened and tightened around Putin. You know, the shadow fleet, the EU has gone after the shadow fleet in terms of their sanctions, and the Ukrainians themselves, they have been hitting those refineries in Russia, and that's had a major impact on the production of gasoline and other kinds of things. So bit by bit, I think the noose is closing on Putin in terms of money coming in from the sale of oil and gasoline for the Russian people.
And Jim, just contextualize this for me. In the absence of revenue from oil, and let's keep in mind that Rosneft here is the second largest oil company in Russia, and it is controlled by the Kremlin. So that's a direct source of funds for their war efforts. If you turn off the taps on the money from oil companies, do they have any other substantive sources of revenue to keep funding this war?
Not really. They have always depended on their energy sector for years to support the Russian economy. That's what you know. That's they kind of have one egg in one basket, and that's it. And so I think we've going to really begin to put pressure on that. But other than the energy exports, Russian exports are pretty minor, particularly compared to the money that they need to run the war and the gasoline they need as well.
Jim, truly appreciate your time today. That's Jim Townsend with the Center for New American Security.